Hi, my name is Daniel Goldstein. I'll be sharing with you a brief commentary on this week's Torah portion, which is called Tisa, and begins in Exodus 30, verse 11. I'd like to begin this week's study with a question. Why did God allow the Messiah to die for the sins of the world on Passover? Why not Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is the national day of atonement for the sins of the people. Why did God choose Passover? Did God make a mistake there? Well, I think we'll find the answers to these questions in this week's Torah portion study. To give you an overview of this week's study, basically Moses descends from Mount Sinai twice after 40 days and 40 nights. And he comes with the Ten Commandments twice. And after the second time that he's on the mountains for 40 days and 40 nights, the Lord told Moses that he's going to make a covenant with him, with Moses, and with the people of Israel, with these words. Now, these words include the Ten Commandments, and they also included some other words. I want to share with you one of the verses which is included in those words. It's Exodus 34, verse 25, and it says this: "You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, nor is the sacrifice of the feast of the Passover to be left over until morning." So there's a very interesting phrase in this verse, which it says, "You shall not offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread." Now this phrase, blood of my sacrifice, in Hebrew, dam zvechi, is very unique because the Lord himself is speaking of his sacrifice. The blood of his sacrifice. It says the blood of my sacrifice. Why does God speak of the blood of his sacrifice? Now this phrase, dam zvechi, is only used twice in the whole of the Torah, here in Exodus 34 and in Exodus 23, and they're both the same exact context, and they're both speaking of the sacrifice of Passover. So what is the significance of this phrase regarding the Passover sacrifice? Now, as I looked in the Babylonian Talmud, which is a collection of rabbinic commentaries on the Bible, I found a commentary on this specific phrase, my sacrifice, used here in Exodus 34. And one rabbi says that it refers to the Tamid sacrifice, which is the daily sacrifice, which was something that was done twice a day, morning and evening, to cover the sins of the people. And that's where God said he would meet with the people there, which is interesting. However, another rabbi said that this phrase, my sacrifice, means this: when there is a sacrifice, meaning the Passover lamb, you are not liable on account of my sacrifices, meaning the plural, all the other sacrifices. So the second rabbi, Rabbi Simeon, is actually saying that the Passover sacrifice is kind of greater than all the other sacrifices. And when you have the Passover sacrifice, it takes place of all the other ones. You don't have to offer the other ones. So we see an interesting understanding from the rabbinic source. However, I think there's even more. The Passover sacrifice is one of the key elements in the covenant that God's making with his people in the Old Testament, as we read here in Exodus 34, 25, and then 27 to 28 actually speak of the covenant that God's making. But the Passover sacrifice was the foundational sacrifice. It was the first sacrifice that God commanded the Jewish people when they were still in Egypt, and it was that sacrifice that brought them from death to life. By keeping that sacrifice, they applied the blood to the door, and there was salvation, there was life for that oldest boy in the home. And we see here that in God's covenant with his people that he's making in the Old Testament, the basis of that covenant is the Passover sacrifice, the blood of the Passover sacrifice. Or as he says here, the blood of my sacrifice. It is a personal sacrifice because God is the one who redeemed them out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Now, it's also interesting to note that this is the same foundation of the covenant in the New Testament, the New Covenant. The New Covenant is based on the Passover sacrifice. Yeshua himself died on Passover to bring us from death to life, out of the house of slavery into freedom. And it's only by faith in God and faith in the covenant he's making with us by the blood of Passover that we have salvation. So in essence, we're actually seeing a parallel here in the Old Testament and New Testament, where when God makes a covenant, it's based on the blood of the Passover lamb, both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. And so I don't think it was any mistake that God chose Passover. He chose it because it is the chief of all the sacrifices, and is on the basis of the blood of the Passover lamb that there is life, that there is salvation, that there is freedom. And God was also saying that it is my sacrifice. He's saying it is his sacrifice, the blood of his sacrifice, because he was also saying that he himself would be that sacrifice, and it is his blood that would atone for our sins. Now, I invite you to read my full commentary on this week's Torah portion at jewelsofjudaism.com under the title, God's Sacrifice. Shabbat Shalom.